So that's what we're going to go over today. These three major components: the classroom activity, it's standards aligned, an online two-player game, and the video biography of Dr. Page. And at the end of today's chat, we'll also have that Q&A opportunity because she's joining. So thank you again, Dr. Page, for sharing your time with us. Okay, so yeah, we can go ahead and move on to the student activity. All right, so this is the main page, the main splash that you're looking at. You can get to it by going to s.si.edu/pvp, and we'll put that in the chat. But scrolling down, you can see that there are these three major sections. So you have all the way on the left, the online game, Dr. Page's biography video in the middle, and then all the way on the right, the Learn link, which is a classroom activity that you can facilitate in your classrooms. So this is a student-facing activity. So it's something you could assign during a remote learning day that they can click through themselves with a little bit of facilitation and a little bit of introduction. But as a heads up, to play the video game, to play the online game, they do need a second player sitting directly next to them, sharing the computer. But everything else they can do on their own. They can facilitate themselves. So we're looking at a bunch of squares, and it's this entire activity is broken into these 7 different parts, and I'll go through briefly what they are, kind of line by line. This first line, representing that first horizontal line of 6 squares, is just an introduction to predator-prey interactions. There's a short 5-minute video on the 5th tile that is an animation. It's based on Dr. Page's lab work, and it gives an introduction to the 2 main characters, the Tangara frog and the fringed-lip bat, who are now just my favorite animals on the planet. They're very cute, as you can tell from the beautiful drawings in the photographs. They're just so funny looking. This second line is all about them. You can see the first 3 of those squares is all about the fringed-lipped bat. And if you click on that 3rd tile, you can see this is all about echolocation and how they find their prey. But if you see that there's that paperclip icon, if it doesn't open automatically, you'll need to click that icon. We just wanted to point that out. So it says watch the video on the left. So by clicking that paperclip, it accordions out this on the left, and that's how they'll be able to watch the video. But they'll in that activity, they'll watch the video and then answer the question about echolocation. And the same thing with the next 3, where they have a little bit of information about the Tangara frog. They'll click the tile, watch the link by clicking the paperclip and clicking the video link that goes to YouTube, and then answer another question about how city frogs compare to forest frogs. The second half of this collection, you can see on the 3rd line where it says now play the game. This introduces the online game. And we're not going to go into the online game just yet, but it is accessible through that 2nd square right there. And we'll go over it in a little bit, but we just wanted to point out how to get to the game. The next tile over from there is a data entry worksheet. And as the students play the game, they'll fill in this chart reflecting how they played the game. So for example, the bat player is recording the dives, and the frog player is recording the number of calls that they made. And we'll go over all of that while we're playing the game. But we wanted to show that there is this worksheet that they play in conjunction with playing the game, that they're learning some basic data entry and then figuring out how to do the math when they come back. The important thing is that they're kind of putting that data entry in and making reflections about how they played and the decisions that they made. And that's reflected in this final tile in the square, where they're thinking about the optimal numbers of calls that they should have made. So you'll see it a little bit more when we go into the game and have a little bit better understanding of what that means about making calls and making chucks. But that's what this whole row is about playing the game, recording some data, and then reflecting upon the data, which is a lot of what the science is that Dr. Page does. And that brings us to Dr. Page. That last row, the 4th row, is all about her. You can see the first tile is a video, the same one that's in that splash page, that she talks about her lab work and she talks about the work that she does there. The 3rd tile is the Gamboa Bat Lab. And so if you go to that website, you can find all kinds of stuff that her lab does. including the resources for kids that I think many of you would be interested in. There's animations, there's games. Eventually, this will probably be there as well. There's a lot of really, really incredible resources out there on that page. Okay, so that is the classroom activity. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to go to the online interactive. You can access the game through this splash page or back through the Learning Lab collection, that black square tile that we had mentioned before. Either one leads to it, but we'll go ahead and load that now. If you're doing this in a classroom and you have students and you've assigned it to students, we do recommend potentially printing out some of those data sheets that we showed you before, just so that they have them and they're able to kind of record them as they're playing the game. Otherwise, having a pencil and paper ready so that they can write down some of those stats and do it later. Again, it is a two-player game, so you do have two players sharing a single screen and sharing a keyboard. So they do need to be in the same room. It's not like an online game that they can all play from anywhere. And so this is it. This is the introduction screen. We are going to click on the left link to go over how to play the game, and then we're going to briefly jump in. So you can see it goes over, there's like avatar, it's very minimalist, but that is Dr. Page, and she talks a little bit about herself and her work. And then it eventually will split off into two screens, which represent the two players and the screens that they control. So here's the two screens. The bat player is there on the left. The frog player is there on the right. And so they share this keyboard and they're sharing the different keys, and they're kind of doing it at their own pace. So if we're gonna skip to the main, and there it is. So this is the main kind of level. Again, same exact thing. You see the bat player on the left and the frog player on the right. And I think we'll start with the bat player on the left. You can kind of move around using the W key to go forward and the A and D keys to go left and right. And as the bat's flying, you see all of these question marks. And so that kind of represents things that the bat can hear. Okay, I know that there's an insect or something that I can eat down there. By pressing the E key, it then kind of activates this echolocation, and then it can have a more clear sense of what those animals are. It's not sure at first, and it uses echolocation. Now it is very clear, oh, this is what this is what that is. And that could be the difference between eating a juicy frog or eating a juicy poisonous frog. So by pressing the S key, it can swoop down and capture things. So eating any of the kind of things that look like butterflies, they're katydids. Eating one of those, refill your echolocation bar a little bit. And if you're able to find the frog and swoop down and successfully catch it, the bat player wins, and that ends the game. The frog side is a little bit different. It doesn't have echolocation. Instead, what they're doing is navigating this forest looking for a body of water. And there is one. You can see the blue with the kind of dots. So that they can make calls. And basically they need the water to make ripples in order to increase the call's volume and make the ripples happen. The jungle is essentially tinder, and the ponds are like this big megaphone for finding mates. So the frog is looking for some water, and again, once it finds the water, it can go ahead and learn and make those calls. Right now, you can see the threat level is just kind of medium level. So there's the frog, there is a bat somewhat nearby, and now it just switched to danger. There is immediate threat for the poor frog. It doesn't know where to go. There could be a bat at any time, so it's probably not the best time to find some water and just make calls. And now it's kind of gone back down to a normal level of warning. And so now it's safe. Great time to make some calls and to attract some mates. So the frog has entered the water, pressed down to enter this kind of new mini game. And you can see the call power is 0 at this green kind of bar. And that first bar represents the first part of the call, which is called a whine. Each of these consecutive arrows, they represent things called chucks. So every call starts with a whine, and then they then have these consecutive chucks to make it a little bit more complex, a little bit more enticing for the mates. adding more chucks does increase that enticingness to the mates, but it also makes it a lot easier for the frog to be found by the bat. So you can see every time the frog starts a call, if you look on the other side where the bat is, there's this yellow ring around the bat. And as the frog continues to make longer calls, the bat has a more clear sense of where exactly that frog is by honing down kind of like a compass arrow of where it is. So it's the choice of nature on the frog player's hand. Do I play it safe and just do a simple whine? Or do I risk the bat's attention and try to make a better call by finding a mate? And that's this dilemma that they make every night. So we've gone over the game. We've gone over the student activity. We've gone over kind of what happens after they play the game, and they put in this data entry and they go back and they reflect upon how they played. Those are the two main elements. We also have this third, which is a biographical video of Dr. Page, where she explains her work. She explains what it's like in working in Panama. In the video, she does kind of offer this glimpse of really fascinating animals. So I definitely recommend checking it out. But now we have this opportunity to chat with her. How did you bridge having an interest in science and then making a career out of it?
So first off, thank you. This is actually, it's just such a delight to see this game come to life. It's wonderful. And I have been reading a few of the comments coming in the chat, and the idea of how do you make science come alive for students? How do you make it relevant to them? And this sort of ties into this bridge, like, how did I get into this? And I think my window into it actually was these kind of crazy stories that, like, these animal communication, animal behavior. It was fascinating to me. And so I hope that this maybe serves for your classrooms, for your students to do the same thing. So I was interested in animals since I was a little kid. I never dreamed that could be a career. In my head, I sort of thought scientists were, the sort of stereotyped Bunsen burner, white lab coat, I don't know, very much in a laboratory and not in the forest, and certainly not trying to decipher animal communication signals. So it was an eye-opener to me that could actually be a career path. And I think that's something that I've really tried to impart on people as I talk to different student groups, and give sort of a window that there actually are just so many different possibilities, different manifestations of a scientist. And one of those is a person who actually looks at frogs and looks at bats and looks at this really interesting interaction between them that I think the game does encapsulate really well. It's basically this mating on the one hand, survival on the other, this sort of conflict between natural selection. You want to obviously avoid predation, and then sexual selection, that you're not going to make it long term unless you pass on your genes to the next generation. And what's beautiful on the science side, what sort of compelled my whole career, is that this boils down into a very simple interaction in these bats and these frogs. So these bats have done an extraordinary thing. They've kind of cracked the communication system of a totally different organism. So there's these male frogs. They need to attract mates, so they're making these loud, conspicuous, very attractive communication calls. They sit in ponds and they inflate and deflate their vocal sacs. And they're these little, lovely protein snacks for any predator to take, but it's actually hard to find them in a cluttered rainforest. And what these bats have done is they've discovered over evolutionary time, they've developed this strategy, this evolutionary strategy of listening into those calls. So they actually are amazing. They can tell if it's a palatable species of frog that's calling or a poisonous one just on the basis of the call. They can tell if it's way too large to eat or just the right size. And actually some frogs are so big that they would turn the tables and eat the approaching bat. So it's an important distinction also. And then they can combine these different sensory systems. So not only are they listening for the communication sounds that those male frogs make, but they're also using echolocation. So the male frogs, of course, don't want to get eaten if they detect an approaching bat. They shut off their calls. They become very quiet. And then the bats can recruit other sensory modalities like echolocation. And echolocation is just such a fun one, and I'm so glad that that made it into the game, because it's a sense we don't have. So it's sort of this magical, like, here's something that humans can't even do, or only in a very rudimentary way in some humans, but this producing very, very high frequency sounds and getting almost a visual picture of what's going on. So all of these components come into the game, and I think that it's kind of fun, because the hope is that different students will plug into different parts of it and become inspired with this story that actually unfolds every night in the rainy season in the forests of Central America.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I think they're so fascinating, and that relationship just sounded like a game. They have to like balance between this risk and reward, and so it's not a game for them; it's real life. But for us to imitate it, it sounds like a lot of fun. All right, so we're going to jump to the next question. It says, because of COVID-19, bats have received an unfair reputation. What are some common misconceptions about bats?
So this is absolutely a hard one, and hopefully it's one that comes up if you're talking about bats in the classroom. And I always sort of stress a couple things. One is that if a student, if a teacher, if anybody, parent encounters a bat, you don't handle it like you don't want to have a direct contact with a bat. Likewise, if you have bats living in your house, you want to make sure that they're living in your house in a safe way, that there's not direct interaction between you and these bats. Bats are extraordinary. So they have absolutely incredible immune systems, and this is phenomenal for them. What it allows them to do is actually harbor a large number of viruses without getting sick. So this is actually something that we as humans are studying and are trying to learn from to boost our own immune defenses. But what it also means is that when there's breakdowns in the systems that have kept us safe for so long, that there can be spillover. There can be the chance for zoonotic disease, basically from us getting sick from wildlife. And by breakdowns, I mean things like habitat destruction, or killing off large portions of populations, transporting animals to spots where they shouldn't be, all sorts of terribly destructive activities that then increase the possibility for viruses in one organism to spill over into another. So I think it's important to recognize that this is a real risk that happens, and it's actually a tremendous learning opportunity for students because COVID-19, of course, is like on the forefront of all of our minds. But somehow do that in a way that's constructive, productive, and stimulates discussion instead of fear. So there are over 1,400 species of bats worldwide. They play incredibly important roles in the ecosystem. They disperse seeds. They have been called gardeners because they propagate forests. They pollinate plants. They also eat a lot of insects. So in terms of controlling vectors for disease, that's an important one. They also eat crop pests. So they play a very important role in agriculture and reducing our own use of pesticides in agriculture. So they have a lot of roles that directly help humans, but they're also critical players just in the natural world too. And I think understanding sort of the diversity of bats and the amazing, incredible adaptations that they have, which are just intrinsically fascinating, and then the important roles that they do play in these ecosystems. I think those are all important components in this larger understanding of bats. Right. I would be careful to stress the dangers that are real, but also just bring home that in ecologically critical role that they play, and then just like how cool they are. They are just fascinating, and I find that kids especially gravitate towards that. So that's the line I try to walk, to not squash that fascination, but certainly instill the feeling of how important it is that we really conserve them in a meaningful way, so that we don't have these chances for spillovers, zoonotic disease, etc.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very important distinction of like people going way overboard and blaming, maybe blaming bats for COVID-19 and just like eradicating them versus kind of studying them more. I think because of COVID-19, I think we're going to see a ton of studying, for generations to come about both the virus, but also potentially around the bats. So I think it could be a really interesting time to learn about bats and what you were saying about their immune systems. I think that could be potentially like very impactful to our own, to how our immune systems work. And maybe there's some sort of something that we could learn from them. So we have another question. Can you talk a little bit about your work-life balance as a scientist? So, yeah, I mean, this is especially special because you're often this kind of fantastical, like super far from home. But what has it been like? Sounds like, you're either working all day and then working all night too, and in your mesh net. But what's it like?
So I have two kids, and they're actually age 13 and 10 now. But the first one was a baby. I had her when I was a grad student, so I've sort of been juggling that from student days through postdoc through early career, and it's just, I mean, I think everybody encounters different scenarios, different challenges, but it's been a wonderful thing to have those kids with me and bring them along for this, journey through the jungle. So early on, I would strap the kids to my back and have a little carrier, and we'd go out into the forest and we'd go netting, and it sort of depended what age they were at. Like they would be toddling, they'd be with me. That was lovely. And then in later years, when maybe I needed to be at home more with them, like they were getting going with school, they needed help with that, I would shift more from like doing intensive field work to doing a lot of writing or doing grant proposals. Or I think that's one thing that science, there's an extraordinary flexibility to it, which is great. And I've enjoyed that so much, not only just because it's fun to be able to do different components, but also because I've been able to shape it around this, whatever is pulling on the other side, on the personal side. So to be with my husband and my kids at home, if that's the priority, pivoting a little more towards that, or if like taking them on adventures in the field, pivoting a little more to that side. So I would say it's mostly worked. I won't say that there haven't been tough times when I've had like, a screaming toddler and like a huge grant proposal that's due, and trying to juggle those two things, a lot of stress involved. But really, for the most part, I do feel like that the flexibility that's associated with the job is tremendous. I think the flip side of that coin is that because there is so much flexibility, it's hard to turn off. So it's hard to not, Saturday morning be like, wow, I really want to like chug through that manuscript a little more. Like it's up to you to draw those boundaries and really make sure that, yep, today's totally kid day. That's all we're focusing on. So I occasionally do miss sort of the external construction of boundaries, having that be a part of the job, but for the most part, it's tremendous to be able to do as much as I do, as flexibly as I do. And I guess you'd have to ask my kids how they feel from their side. They certainly had a lot of adventures. We have monkeys eating bananas off our porch in the backyard, and it's lovely to hear all their funny stories when they compare notes with other kids.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, when they're fully grown and they talk about their childhood and growing up and what different stories and a different kind of experience that they'll have had. Basically living in your office of this jungle, being totally surrounded by your office. All right, so I think we have one more question, and time for one more, really. What do the other scientists at STRI study? So you had mentioned there are lots and lots of people at STRI. tell us a little bit more about STRI and what, the different campuses and, all the different types of work that goes on.
Yeah, well, this is extraordinary. So STRI, as I mentioned, it's the one part of Smithsonian that's in Panama. And we have a headquarters in Panama City, but then we have field research stations actually spread out throughout the isthmus. So we've got several marine spots. We've got a lovely spot where I started my own PhD on an island in the Panama Canal. We've got spots in the rainforest. We've got spots in the lowland forests. And what we have is these, floods of researchers from all over the world who come to do their research programs here, to do their research projects here. So this could be graduate students who have master's or PhD work that this is where they do the research component of that. Often we have folks who started as graduate students who then went off and became faculty members and now are returning with their own lab full of students, and it just goes on and on, really for generations, which is lovely because you do build, as I mentioned, these long-term collaborations and friendships with scientists who return year after year after year. But in terms of diversity of scientists, it's amazing. It's just as diverse as all the taxa that we have here. So you have, as I mentioned, marine studying all kinds of things from marine invertebrates to whales and sharks and all manner in between. We have a bunch of microbial ecologists who are studying all the little tiny things that are critical in all these ecological interactions. Forest ecologists. So we have a ton of people who just look at trees and try and crack why are there so many tropical trees and how could so many coexist. Lots of course, animal projects that I love. So we have bird researchers coming from all over the world. We have people studying anoles, monkeys, beautiful monkey projects that look at how social groups interact and who the leaders are, who the followers are, and how they make those decisions. We have anthropologists and archaeologists. So it's full on across the board, and it's very inspiring because you really, you get a sense of their research not only in, we have weekly science seminars when people present, PowerPoint presentations on what they're up to at the moment, but you also bump into them at these field sites and hear, at the lunch table, like what they're up to and what's worked that day and what totally failed and what they're trying to do to fix it the next day. So it's, again, I think that's the beauty of it, is there's so many different types of people doing so many different types of things. So it does crack those stereotypes that there's, one way to approach science and one type of person who could do it. It's extraordinary, the breadth of studies that go on here.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for all of your time dedicated to answering a million of my questions and all the time that you spent today answering the questions. And thank you everyone that's been participating in the chat and that it came to the webinar to show up today. Again, we appreciate your time so much and appreciate all the work that you do so much as well. So this session, as well as all three, will be archived. You'll be able to come back later if you want, if there's anything you forgot or anything that you wanted to check in on again. So we'll have these archived and we'll send these out to your registration links. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.